Ben Shapiro doesn't believe in the idea of a living wage.
Well, I mean, first of all, the wage to cost of living gap would not exist in the absence of regulation and subsidy, at least not nearly as much. The fact of the matter is that one of the reasons you have housing shortages in blue areas is because of development restrictions that are largely created by the left. The reason that you have massive inflation right now is, again, because of left-wing financial policy. It tends to be that wages move in tandem with costs, generally speaking, because, again, there is no such thing as a non-living wage. Nobody dies on their wage. And that is not a thing that happens inside the United States. This is why when people say living wage, the question is, well, what do you mean by a non-living wage? Do you just mean a wage that you don't think is high enough? And for what job? And what does the market look like?
Now, nobody dies on their wage. Oh, really? That sounds like something, that a person who has never talked to a human being outside of his tax bracket would say. Just saying. Look, Ben Shapiro, he is basically a wealthy mouthpiece for wealthy people. That's it. Or people, I should say, wealthier than he is. That's the only economic opinions that he has, is of rich people. He is out there spouting rich people opinions, things that you would hear in the billionaire, millionaire cocktail circuit. So that's why mainly Ben Shapiro talks about culture war issues. I'm pretty sure most of his audience is like, wait, what are you talking about, Ben? Like, we literally cannot make enough money to live. And he's like, non-living wages. Nobody's ever died. Oh, really? Really? So let's look at housing. So he actually makes a point that makes a little bit of sense, right? So let me explain. Housing is expensive. Okay. I mean, yes, that's what he gets right. Now, here's the thing, though. A lot of people say, well, we can fix the housing issues by just building more houses. But that's not the whole of it. That's not going to fix the problem here of companies that are flush with cash from doing stock buybacks, for example, coming in to the housing market with all cash offers. Well, then buy up all the new housing, the new real estate, and turn them into expensive rentals. That's not going to fix the issue. But having more houses available, yes, of course, you do have to have enough housing and build enough housing to sate demand. But you also have to make sure that these wealthy investors and foreign corporations and banks don't come in and buy it all up. And that's what's going on here. So now look, that's not an example of over-regulation, right? As Ben Shapiro and people like him would have you believe, we're having too much regulation in the zoning issues, and that's why we can't build any more houses. No, that's not true. That's not true at all. No, there's a lack of regulation when it comes to who can buy single-family homes. Now, wealthy developers also buy off politicians with campaign contributions, bribes, and will zone things like condos instead of affordable housing. And of course, that's backed by NIMBYs, the people that are like, oh, affordable housing? Oh, not in my backyard. I don't want to live near people who are poor. That's not an example of a left-wing policy. That's not what's creating these issues. The issue is capitalism. And I say that because corporations have a fiduciary responsibility to maximize profit. That's why companies all over the country keep wages low and crush labor unions. That's what's going on here. And by the way, so let's get into inflation, right? He talks about inflation. So now, supply chain issues did cause some inflation. And that's a result, of course, of COVID. But a lot of the inflation that we've seen is also a result of corporate profiteering. So, look, you had CEOs and shareholder meetings that would sit there and they would gloat about how they would take advantage of this situation in order to jack up prices way above the additional costs that they have incurred, again, because of the very real supply chain issues. And then, they would pocket the difference. So they would just add additional on top. That's why you have companies that are making massive profits and why inflation is so incredibly high. Then, of course, let's talk about the Fed, the Federal Reserve, pumping trillions of dollars of liquidity into the banks, who once again as I've shown you before, turn around and bought back their stocks, billions and billions of dollars worth of stock buybacks, and then gave their executives enormous bonuses. That same Federal Reserve now that is raising interest rates in the hopes, and this is from their own words, to create more unemployment, to make more people unemployed because they say, wow, that's going to cool inflation. Does any of that sound like left-wing economic policy to you? No. What it is it's corporate-friendly policy. That's what it is. It's the same kind of corporate-friendly policy that Ben Shapiro capes for all the time. No, you know what a non-living wage is, Ben? It's when 40% of unhoused people, homeless people, work, are employed, and still cannot afford a home. Where 53% of those living in homeless shelters work and still have to live in a homeless shelter. It's when corporations pay their workers so little that they have to encourage them to go and get on Medicaid and food stamps, government programs. These are subsidies. While that same company, the parent corporation, takes millions in handouts from the government. It's when people, die because they can't afford to go to a doctor. It's when they have to ration their insulin. That's what a non-living wage looks like, Ben. Maybe you ought to talk to somebody who works in these jobs that don't pay people enough to survive. Maybe you should actually sit down and have a conversation. Or better yet, maybe you should actually try living on these wages that you claim aren't actually real. Oh, there's no such thing as a non-living wage. And you should have to work on that without help from your billionaire friends. If he had to do that, by the way, he'd be singing a different tune. But of course, Ben Shapiro is never going to do that because he's already got his. He doesn't care about you. He's just, once again, a mouthpiece for incredibly wealthy people trying to protect the status quo.